should expect.
But if she's coming from the city, sometimes it can be
Yeah.
tight, but you have a quorum, so you can
Okay.
start whatever you like.
We will call meeting to order. And we'll have roll call. Amanda.
Present.
Lauren.
Present.
Mila.
Present.
And then present. And the agenda changes, we're going to have a couple of agenda changes on the non-action items, fire station number 3.
Okay.
We're going to move that to the front of the program because we have the people here to speak to that.
Oh, the
And we're going
architect.
to switch the retreat and the public art master plan discussion. We're going to switch those. The retreat should only take a few minutes. We're going to decide on the date, and then we'll have time for the master plan. So go ahead and do that.
Good.
Okay, any oral communications? Okay, we need approval of the minutes for both the study session and the last meeting that we had on March 12th, and the study session, which again on March 12th, which was before the regular meeting. So
Was that the 17th or the 12th?
let's see,
17th.
17th, March 17th.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I was absent at that last meeting. There's some commissions that I'm on where I can still vote even though I was absent. Is that the best practices for this particular commission?
That is the case. We've asked
Okay.
the clerk for clarification on that. So
Okay.
just because a commissioner was not present at the meeting does not prevent them from approval of minutes.
Okay. I've
But it's
still
up to the
reviewed.
commissioner.
Okay.
Some are more comfortable with that than others.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any changes or additions to the minutes?
No.
Okay, we have a motion to approve them, please.
I move that we approve the
And
minutes from the
second.
study session on March 17th. And do you want me to do them separately?
And you can, yes, you can do the same.
Okay. And the regular meeting on the 17th.
Okay, we have a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. And now it's financial report.
Oh, goody. So why don't we start with the maintenance budget? As you all may recall, the maintenance funds do not carry over from year to year, so we do tend to zero them out. In this case, once we have now added in the ARG mural condition survey, which completes the survey of all of the permanently sited collection, we are slightly over, and we will be able to take care of that with some of our operating funds just to zero it out. But that will completely take care of our maintenance budget for this fiscal year. Are there any questions on that?
Congratulations on getting to the end of it.
Thank you. Okay, so then let's look at the Art and Public Places CIP budget, which is sort of the most complicated one that's in front of you. So you can see under the actual costs what has hit that fund so far. Commitments, these are all things that are under contract. And that leaves us with a balance of $55,575. And then there's a list of projects that at some point have been approved by the commission but have not been initiated as of yet. So if those were all to take place, then we would have a little over $7,000. Now, I will add that those PAC-approved future projects, usually we would discuss those at our annual retreat when we make our work plan. So that may be a good opportunity when we're looking at our budgets and reevaluating what the work plan is, to look at those and evaluate those again.
One quick question on the bottom of the PAC approved future projects. Is
Yes.
that $45K total for the University Avenue tunnel project?
Yes.
Okay. So matching 15 for Stanford and the other.
And then there was additional allocated.
Okay.
And then on the municipal CIP, you can see what was carried over, what was given to us in the 2016 adopted budget, giving us an available budget of $179,000. And then we have the commission-approved future projects. So those were approved at one time, but they're not currently encumbered under contract officially. So those would leave us with a balance of $152,335.
Sorry, say that last part.
Yeah, can you do that one?
So the total, the municipal, this is the municipal percent for art funds, which do roll over. So those, we have $179,000 in that account.
Oh, 159 is less 7,575. Is that right?
So the 152 is, see, I'm not sure where this came, is the 179, and then we have $20,000, the Joyce Sue and the artist-led engagement.
Right.
Right. So if those went forward, then it would bring us down to actually 159.
But they're not in contract.
Those are not yet under contract, so they're not officially committed. Right. So once they're under contract, they move up under commitments.
Because those projects were approved prior to my tenure here, I'm just curious, what was the timeline for them?
The artist-led engagement, when the commission decided it wanted to do artist-led engagement, and there was actually funds set aside for 2 of those projects. One went to Mobile Arts Platform, and the second one was never utilized. So that's still sitting there, but it's not under a contract. So again, that's something that we would evaluate and discuss when we do our 2-year work plan.
Okay.
And the other one was additional funding set aside for the percent for art for Joyce's project at the golf course.
And how goes the golf course?
The golf course is suddenly getting some forward traction, so we will
Good. All right.
we will be able to bring that back to the commission shortly.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Elise. And staff comments.
We're going to have a very busy May. So the first thing I actually want to share, some of you may have seen on Facebook, and I apologize, the sound in here is, we're getting some strange feedback. But we wanted to share a new video that Narduli Studio just released about our peace conversation here. It has gotten some really good visibility. In fact, one of our assistant city managers and someone from the communications department highlighted the piece at this conference on government and technology. And people were just blown away. And so it's really great to get it in front of an audience of not just people who love art, but people who are just fascinated that the city of Palo Alto as a government is willing to do this. So, so let's start the new video.
City Hall isn't a place just for government workers. This is a place where the basic American experiment in self-government is actualized in the community where people live. And that's why we felt we needed to turn these spaces into community and public meeting spaces, why we needed to have a piece of artwork that spoke to engagement and invitation to the community.
We designed it to be welcoming and playful. And yet conversation raises fundamental issues about public participation, about accountability, and about community. If I can imagine something that offers the spontaneity of somebody raising their hands at some kind of a public meeting, that spontaneity and also the integrity of that. And as we started working on it, what it really became for us was a new way of understanding that impulse, forming new democracy is something we make together, and that it changes moment by moment. I want our project to be topical, flexible, so that its issues draw public attention and conversations reflected visually, plainly visible for all to see. Now I imagine that over time, this piece will create its own rhythm.
That
But
you?
no matter how this piece matures and no matter how it goes over time, I guess for me that I hope that when people see it, or use it, they will think, this is a place where people are aware of their surroundings. This is a place where we can be heard. And a place where we do listen to what others have to say.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
It was cool.
That is really good.
So that's something Susan Narduli just released, so we're excited about that. And then, so we also wanted to announce that the evening of May 11th, we have an artist talk with Bruce Beasley and Roger Stoller at the Mitchell Park Library. And they'll be talking primarily about art and technology and the use of emergent technology in the creation of their artwork, specifically the pieces at Mitchell Park. But if you've ever had the opportunity to see Bruce Beasley speak before, you know that he's, in some cases, had to invent new technology in order to create some of his artworks. And then we also have May 16th, we will be installing Chime on King Plaza. And we're identifying a date or an event to tie in some sort of celebration for the arrival of that piece. And then we're looking at May 26th. From 5 to 6, the Keen store, which will have a couple of the Colin Seelig pieces in front of it, they said that they would love to host a reception or an open house to celebrate the pieces coming downtown. So that's the date and time that we're targeting, which has just come together today. So that's it for staff comments.
All right, great, thank you. All right, now to the agenda, we're going to do non-action item 3 first, which is fire station number 3.
Yes. So you have a staff report in front of you, and you're going to take the lead on the okay on the presentation. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. So Fire Station 3 is located on Embarcadero Road at Newell. It's right across from the Art Center, and just to make you aware, if you aren't already, there is a large sort of sculptural signage that for the Art Center and the library that is supposed to go on that corner directly opposite of this piece, and it's pretty large and colorful, so that's something to keep in mind as we move forward with talking about potentially integrating artwork into this fire station. So that's something to keep in mind, and there are a number of constraints with the site, for instance, the tree in the foreground and the widening of the driveway in the back that are going to make it a little difficult to put a standalone sculpture. So if we do integrate art into this project, it would make sense to either have it be architecturally integrated or within the pavement, or a small entryway space which is available as the public comes in. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and walk through a little bit of the three potential designs and where we are, and then I can jump back in.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Young Tran. I'm with Public Works Department, and with me is
Bridget Medved, also Public Works.
And thank you for having us here, and thank you for moving us to the front as well.
Yeah.
So as Elise mentioned that, as Elise mentioned that the site will be, the existing fire station will be bulldozed, and we'll build a brand new one. At this point, we are at the conceptual design, so we have the architect on board, SKA from Oakland, and all they do is design firehouses. So with the houses, residentials in the vicinity, the architect had come up with 3 options at this point, and we have a date to go to the ARB for a study session
in June, sometime early June, hopefully.
So what we will do is we're going to present these 3 options at ARB and get an input at the study session, and we'll come back to the drawing board. And if there's any changes, we'll get a date, come back to the commission for an update. And at this point, what you're looking at on the screen right now is option number
Yes.
1. And this is a square box type. Again, the constraints were trees and the size of the lot that we have to build a station with. And the fire engines are getting larger and longer nowadays, and with the oak tree on Newell Road, we have to keep that driveway a certain width and so on. So again, there's chances for incorporating art, but it's going to be creative. So this option here, what you're looking at, is favored by the fire chief and some other folks. And
this is their, okay, so
Yeah.
literally is their option 1. Okay.
correct. And again, we will present it to the community as well. So after we go to ARB and get the feedback. So and then next options.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just was wondering, for the most part, are the interiors the same, like the requirements of the interiors the same? You know, like, does he favor this first option because of interior, like, function-wise, it does something different, or he just likes that aesthetic look?
Oh, it's just aesthetic look. Go ahead.
I think it does match the library as well. There's on option 1 there was a terracotta. I mean, in the library they used a lot of terracotta, and they wanted to reflect that in the fire station because they're so close, and they wanted to work that together.
I see.
In that sense.
Oh, that's
With,
interesting.
Yeah.
with all options presented today, the floor plans is the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
just
So,
curious.
yeah.
That's good.
So, option 2 is more like a iClo type, and then the exterior materials are a little bit different. You notice the doors, the bay for the bays are folding doors now, and not like the old days where roll up because they open faster. But yeah, that's just typical. This design makes it look more like a home style.
Yeah, this design reflected kind of a neighborhood feel in that area as opposed to a kind of a civil building. And so they wanted to put some kind of an Eichler type look to it with the exposed beams and the cedar. But then still has some metal to it. There's some metal facade there.
Okay.
Option 3?
Option 3. This is more of a modern look, and this has the top row windows to give you more lights and so on, and the exteriors are more stone type versus the second option of a cedar. So, but all 3 options, you know, the shapes is like box-like. So there's not much changes in terms of footprint, but just elevation, and again, the real estate for art along that area is very limited. So
Yeah, they're pretty constrained. I think the smaller box you see behind the tree is where the entry would be for the public.
And do you mind walking everyone through briefly, so above where the fire engines are, how is the space being programmed on level 1 and level 2 of each of those
I brought a couple of this was the design pack in it. It does have, if you want to look at it, it does have the floor plans. So on the first level is where the apparatus bay is, where the fire truck is, and where they keep all their equipment and stuff. And on the upper level is the dormitories and the kitchen. The kitchen is right there in front on Embarcadero, and then on the left of that is the dormitories, and then on the right, which is the boxes above that, is the exercise room.
And below the exercise room is the entrance
Is
with
the-
reception and I guess an office for
Yeah.
the chief. And so the fire engine will come in from Newell driveway and then exit out of Embarcadero versus now the backing in from Embarcadero. So,
And then the public parking is in the back.
Oh, that's so cool. So,
And then there would be an entryway, the public entryway on the New Hall sidewalk, on the New Hall side.
And the dormitories, they had the plan co-ed.
I'm not sure.
one room is a double room, but all rooms are single.
Okay, so the male or female could occupy.
Correct,
rooms.
yes.
I think that's nowadays what they have to do because of the integrated
Yeah.
fire department.
Yep. So basically, that's what we have. Right now, it's still, again, in the conceptual stage. We haven't shown it to ARB yet. You're the first one to see this publicly. So, but again, we'll come back to you if there's any changes and so on. We'll keep going as the project progresses.
So because of, the estimated budget for the project, the art budget it's only about $50,000. So it's a very modest budget, especially if we're looking at doing something that's architecturally integrated. So I bring this to the commission because it's a firehouse and members of the community love going to a firehouse. And so there are potential spaces where we could integrate artwork that would be visible to the public. I believe there's a small reception area where the public entrance would be, so we could do something more like an interior mural or something like that that's would bring the cost down and be visible to the public, or do something smaller that's integrated into the pavement or potentially on the building. But I want to make sure the commission is aware that, with the limited budget, there's only so much we can do. Or if the commission feels like it's not necessarily appropriate to do it here, that the funds should be pooled, I bring that to you as well. Because, as staff, we're certainly aware of the pros and cons, and I would certainly welcome the input from the commission on how we should proceed. What's your perception on whether or not we ought to integrate art into this project?
oh, go ahead.
I was curious about the signage. So are there particular restrictions about signage? Because I know looking around, a lot of the fire stations have very similar, I think, wood.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, like, if I see that there is some signage up on the top. And so I'm just curious, that was like my first instinct. Oh, it could be really fun to have a neat sign. But does it have to be the same at all the firehouses, or can it be different?
Good question. I think we want to keep it standard. At the same time, again, we're going to present at ARB, and I think signage is, because we have 6 box light, and I think the architect want to have the sign up a little bit outstanding. So it may be different from other fire stations, but is basically have the same worded, nothing fancy, basic Palo Alto Fire Station number 3, but it may be bigger, larger font and so on because of the vertical.
And in general, signage is very closely monitored by the ARB. So we've tried to keep a separation between public art and signage, and tried to keep the public art separate from the signage, partly for that reason.
And then I have one other quick question. What is the reasoning behind rebuilding the firehouse?
Building it's old, it's outdated, and there's new code and so on. So seismically, it's not stable.
And do you know if they're going to be doing all the other ones too at this eventually?
I think there's one fire station number 4 is next after this one. There was a study done way back. There's a few stations, but these 2 are the immediate needs. So we proceeded with 3 and 4 back to back. So.
Any other questions?
Well, just for us to talk about general discussion, I would like to know what that sign is going to look like, because I know they're coming out with the Art Center sign. And I think of the library and the Kids Museum, and that's what comes to mind for me. And then also when you're driving down Embarcadero, we have some larger pieces on that area, that grassy area, even though it's a huge expanse. but there are some larger pieces right there. That corner at Newell and Embarcadero is a bike thoroughfare. Lots of bikes, so much so they have a patrol there during the school hours, and a car commuting area. So we want to be, I think, sensitive to that. I kind of liked the pavement idea almost, because as little kids are walking in to do their visit, or as the teens and preteens are going to Jordan on their commute, if they saw something on the pavement, that might be pretty cool and wouldn't draw attention in the same way a larger structure would. But I'd be interested to know about that sign. Do you have any information? Because it's going to stand out.
Yes,
I think.
it's been to the ARB. It's been approved. There is actually a small rendering of it on the site. One of those notices of construction coming up.
So isn't
And
that
it's-
area nice? I was over there and I didn't see it, so I'll have to go look.
It
really.
is. It's on the corner of the art center, just behind that tree on the very corner.
Okay.
And it is by the same person who created the Junior Museum and
Right, I
Zoo
know
sign
exactly,
and the
yeah.
Children's Library.
So it'll be. It's going to be a great sign.
It's
but it'll
large.
be-
I don't remember the exact measurements, but it is something along the lines of,
Wow.
10 feet tall and 16 feet wide, and
Look at me. Look at
and
me.
multiple elements and bright colors.
Yeah.
Is it possible for staff to forward to us the draft of the
I think
sketch
that's-
that they have?
That's a good idea.
Just so that we can see a preview?
Absolutely, it's no problem.
Amanda?
Yeah, I just, like, when am I on? Yeah. I was, before I even saw the drawings, I feel that we need more murals in this town, but very well executed ones. And I don't know, with just the limited 3/4 view, how or where it could go on the exterior, but I'm curious about the interior. And it being a place that the public visits, I would imagine big expanses of probably all white walls, and if those could be animated, I'm thinking of the historical museum, like with those it was the old hospital, I guess, or it was the old PAM, and you look in and you just like it's like a treasure, but you're still seeing it. And so I'm wondering, I mean, it looks to me like the entryway is quite small, but I can't tell if there is an expanse to do something that is almost like historical art, like paying homage to Palo Alto's history or something like that, that people would take their picture in front of and post to Facebook and get really excited about going and visiting and seeing. I love murals, so I think with the budget, and I think the fact that this is a public building, sort of in a little artistic enclave, if you will, with the art center being across the street, it could be, we could really kind of step out. It wouldn't have to be super traditional. It could be kind of something interesting.
Looking at the floor plan right now, it's very small. I
It
think
does look small.
Yeah, it's small.
I was kind of
It's-
imagining like a big entryway for
No,
visitors,
the only-
like that could just
yeah.
be completely.
I see where you're coming from. The only open area that can do that well for you will be in the apparatus bay, but there's so many equipments and on the
Is
wall.
that right?
On the wall.
Yeah, and so on. So that the front office, the front entry is pretty narrow. It's 28 feet with the washroom office. There's not much room for a wall. Would be at the stairway up. That's the only thing.
Right.
You're looking at 10 feet wide by 10 feet high. If there's any possibility, they'll be on that wall.
And is that visible from the street at all?
Well, it won't be. Even though there's a window there, but you have to get inside the building to see it.
Right.
Now, on the exterior, you have a lot of vertical surfaces, but the finished surfaces are
They're not really.
yeah,
neutral.
cedars and stones and so on.
Right.
So we have to incorporate that into that. I'm not sure how it will work, but you do have vertical surfaces on Newell and on Barcado, not so much, but at the corner right behind that tree.
Right, right.
Yeah. So if someone can incorporate something onto those walls, we will welcome that idea.
It could be
but-
interesting.
Now, I have one other question. So normally for the private art, it has to be visible for a certain number of hours. It's not the same. Would it be the same?
Well, we would want to
guidelines or
hold to the
requirements?
same standard.
I
So
do, right?
having
That's what I'm
it,
thinking.
so having it in the lobby actually would meet the standard because people are allowed to walk in to visit the firehouse anytime. They're not going
okay.
into the private areas; they're going into the public lobby.
The lobby. Okay.
So it would actually meet that criteria.
Okay. I'm just thinking more in terms of like, you don't want to, I mean, they are working too, and you know, if there is something that happens, you know, I just want to be respectful too of their space. And if we have a lot of people going in, oh, just to look at the mural, you know, that.
We wouldn't put it up in the dormitories. That we would not recommend.
I have some comments.
Sure.
I think so. I know we're not charged with evaluating the architectural components of it. However, I see with option 2 the Edgewood neighborhood is nearby, the large Eichler neighborhood. So I like the mid-century references, and I think that there is a lot of potential to connect to some of the larger pieces that are at the Arts Center. Mm-hmm. For the Eichlers that I know, I mean, it looks like it's these are concrete masonry units that are next to the wood. Yeah. I don't know. A lot of Eichlers that I know in South Palo Alto have painted over that, and oftentimes it's with white. So we could potentially have a wall piece that's mounted on a facade that here in this rendering it might look like too busy because we're looking at a lot of dark, you know, like it looks like the architect envisioned gray, but if this were white or even if it had a stucco, that might be sacrilegious for mid-century modern, but you know, you could potentially have, you know, a steel piece that has like the same tones that, or a red piece like the one that moves. I forget the name of it. The sound.
It's right there.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, you could have something that slightly moves, but it's in a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
It might have just like 2 small moving pieces. I also like the idea of something in the pavement because I've been part of many a elementary school field trip that's gone to the Arts Center and then walks to Rinconada to eat their lunch before returning to wherever school they've come from. So I think having it be part of a walkable neighborhood is important. I think for option 3, I will be curious to see what the ARB says. To me, it doesn't. Having looked at some of the houses that are there, it seems like it could be anywhere modern, and it doesn't ring true to Palo Alto. So yeah, I encourage, like, if the architect is going to go in some of these directions, think about how some of the homeowners have warmed up their modern pieces, and that might allow us to put a modern piece in there, but not have it be harsh.
Just to, on the color schemes, the architect you notice that the colors are gray and terracotta-like because the main library in the vicinity. Main library has that terracotta wall, and the recent renovation has this metal piece that the new program room that was added has a metal screen piece that had a pattern of the terracotta wall. So that's where the gray comes from. Terracotta. That's what they.
I was just looking at like the Arts Center nearby and where a lot of the families enter in on the side there on Newell, and they're lighter colors there. You don't necessarily reference the library further down the street, so that's sort of where I was going. But
Great.
You guys will figure it out.
Anything else? Well, thank you for coming tonight. I think there are some considerations to think about the neighborhood and the housing around the neighborhood. I guess it's in a neighborhood area. The Art Center across the street, the other pieces of art that have been referenced, and I always favor something being integrated into the building for public art, so that could be something that could be thought about. And the best piece of public art I ever saw for a fire station was a Dalmatian dog sliding down a fire pole. So, you know, and that is whimsical. It attracts the eye, and people, I don't want to plagiarize something like that, but, you know, it's something like that to think about. But then you have this big tree. You got the sign that's going in, too, so you don't want to clash with the sign, with that sort of stuff. So it's going to be a challenge, I think, but if you get an artist on board soon enough to be able to work with the architect to do that. I think that would be well worth the time and effort to do that. But I've been involved in many fire station rebuilds in San Jose, where they had bond measures to rebuild all the fire stations, and it's been interesting to see the public art that's gone into those. So there are, like you're saying, there's a lot of vertical spaces that can be used, but then you got to think about the trees and the signs and everything else that's going in. So
That's right.
it'll be a bit of a challenge, but I think it can be done, and it'll be a well-done piece.
Great. Again, this is conceptual design.
Yeah.
Things gotta change.
yeah,
and,
it is, yeah.
and so again, we'll come back to the commission.
Yeah, but if you get somebody on early enough, then you can really get all that thinking and all the changes that are going to happen to do that.
Great.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
you.
I'm
Thank
really
you.
looking forward to the project. It's going to be interesting to see everything that's around there that go in there.
Jigsaw puzzle.
All right, thank you.
both for coming.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to the action items, and the first action item is the creative seating pilot project.
So I should recuse myself from this action. Is that something that I need to leave the room for, or do I just silent?
Typically, you do leave the room, and so
Okay.
if you want to go out here or out there, either Nadia or myself will come get you when we're finished with the item.
So, so my employer is a member of the Downtown Association, and I am not on their board yet. I am a nominee to be on their board, so I have been going to the meetings, and I was part of this discussion. So that's why I'm recusing myself.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mila.
You can input into conversations. All right, creative seating.
Okay. So I did briefly bring up this item at the end of the last commission meeting to bring it to your attention. The Downtown Business and Professional Association has long been advocating for a more creative seating solutions along University Avenue, and have come up with several concepts, but the Public Works team, who is responsible for the cleaning, the maintenance, and care of these things, was not comfortable with any of those choices, did not feel like they were sturdy enough. It is city funds that are going toward these benches, and so they needed to make sure that it was really something that that would last. So the condition of the existing benches has severely deteriorated. I believe one of them actually fell apart. They've had to remove a few of them where the center braces had come out. They're becoming dangerous. So Public Works needed to go ahead and purchase replacement benches that are very nice, but nothing terribly unusual, to replace those. Public Works and the Downtown Business Association did reach out to me to say, hey, is there any sort of solution we might be able to come up with? Once these benches go in, it's, we really may have lost our opportunity to do something creative. Public Works was not so certain about purchasing something until they'd had a chance to really get acquainted with this concept of having creative seating. Colin Seelig is an artist who is our pre-qualified pool of artists, someone I had been looking at previously, and he agreed to loan us some pieces outright for a period of a year for a trial basis, so that Public Works and the Downtown Business Association could try them out and see what their comfort level is. So we did, I took a representative from Downtown Business Association and from Public Works out to Colin Seelig's studio and looked at them, let them really evaluate it, see the edges, make sure that it was going to meet all the safety ADA requirements and whatnot that we needed it to. Everyone came out just thrilled and excited. The pieces are made of upcycled propane tanks. So those enormous long tanks that usually are just sent somewhere to rust. Colin takes a plasma cutter and cuts the edges and does not reform them. So this is actually a long side of the tank. This is another long side of the tank. This is part of the end of one of the tanks. So he creates these pieces and then powder coats them. So they're extraordinarily durable and rather colorful and whimsical. So he did agree to loan them to us. Everybody's excited and on board for that to happen. We're looking at putting those in early May. There is some cost associated with this for him. So he is doing the delivery and the installation. The pieces will need to be recoated once they're returned to him, which has some cost to it if he is then going to be able to sell them. And part of the amount, the dollar amount here requested, is a small artist stipend, which the artist has agreed that if at the end of the loan period we decide to purchase a couple of pieces, some of that would be allocated, would be credited toward the purchase. So the total amount that staff is requesting this evening is $6,665 to cover the costs associated with the loan and to cover a small stipend for the artist. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
So what's the breakdown, what's the cost associated with the loan? Is that just he said he's doing the installation and the delivery. Are we trying to cover some of that?
Yes, so
Okay.
it's to cover his costs and the
Okay,
fact
great.
that he has to recoat them when he gets them back,
Got it.
which has some significant cost,
Yeah.
and a small artist stipend.
Okay, great.
Amanda?
I was just wondering, what portion of that amount is the Downtown Business Association or any of the private businesses picking up?
None. He has agreed to loan them free and clear. I've come to the commission to ask that we actually pay to cover the costs. Now, if someone determines we love these things and we want to purchase them, I think then we can enter into a discussion about cost sharing on those pieces if we're going to acquire them.
And where, is it just University Avenue? I can't remember, I think you told us
Yes,
last
it's
time.
on University Avenue. They're going there are 5 pieces going in 3 different locations.
Okay.
So one smaller piece, the yellow one, would go in front of Sam's Chowder House.
Nice.
There are 2, like the asymmetrical pieces going in front of the Keen store. And then the 2 benches on the right are scheduled to go in front of Yo-Yoi, the new sushi place that opened. So they would be spread out by several blocks and on opposite sides of the street.
So what would happen if we decide that in the end we want to keep them? We have to eventually pay for them, right?
Yes.
And would that be also coming out of our budget, or would it be coming out of, like Amanda said, could we
Public
pool?
Works.
That's what I was saying. If it's determined that the city does want to move ahead and purchase these,
Yeah.
that
So
would
would
be
the
a great
city-
opportunity to say, okay, well, if the Downtown Business Association wants to put forward a certain amount, then the commission may consider putting forward another
Okay.
portion. So that is not spelled out. At this point, it's a 1-year temporary or installation
Yeah.
as a test pilot to see how they actually function in public.
Anything else? It's a good marketing move for
I just wanted to ask, because it would be helpful. So I think that the idea is great. I think that it's a legitimate cost to, of course, reimburse the artist, and like it's fair. I just don't know that that cost should come out of the public art budget, and so I would be interested in hearing from fellow commissioners, because I don't have a problem with the idea. I think it's a good idea, and I think that, again, like, I'm all for reimbursing fairly artists and supporting them. I wonder, I guess, about the like notion of a predetermined design already coming to us as a temporary work, as opposed to, you know, casting a call to determine a certain signature for the city, kind of, or for the downtown area.
Right. And that's the reason I brought it to the commission last time, because it did come about in an unusual way. So we've been calling it a creative seating pilot. Without this, just the standard benches are going in. So this was a solution that Colin came forward and said, I can loan you some benches to have on a trial basis. So you're correct in that it did not come forward as we would have our normal temporary public art, which is why we've been couching it as a creative seating pilot, because it did come about in a very different way than most of our temporary art.
Right. Who pays for the benches? Is that Public Works that pays for the benches?
Yes, and they've purchased benches, standard benches for these locations. So if this fell through, they're just
Right.
putting the standard benches in. When these come out, the standard benches will go in.
Got it. And if we decide to keep them, they'll either move to a different location or the standard benches will go somewhere else. 'Cause
That's right.
They use them throughout the
They'll
city.
get absorbed
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah, got it. I understand what you're saying. That, since they already pay for benches, why are we having to bankroll these benches? But I also really like the creative,
Doing
cool,
something
like,
new, and I know.
12-month trial.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Anything else? I look at it as a temporary art installation, and there's costs for the temporary art installation, so that's what this is. Any other discussion? And we need a motion to approve.
I approve.
Make a motion.
I motion to approve that, that we allocate funds in the amount of $6,665 for temporary placement of art benches by artist Colin Sulik on University Avenue.
Okay, have a second.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Great,
Glad you didn't make it 6666.
They're going to be so fun to see, and they're going to be here before we know it.
Yep.
They're-
I know I was late, but I just noticed, I don't know if it really makes a huge difference, but I noticed for the study session minutes, it said that I came in at 9:23 a.m.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me, but just
No,
FYI.
it's exciting, of course. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is the comprehensive condition report and protection of the, can't read that.
It's a Russian name.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
know. Viktor Arnatov.
Armatov frescoes. Okay.
Okay, great. So I believe, was it Amanda, was it you that mentioned these
Yeah.
earlier this evening already? So
They're so cool.
So here you have the picture. If you haven't been oriented, it's the former Palo Alto Medical Foundation building, and the Palo Alto History Museum is working to convert it into the museum. It's owned by the city, and when the city acquired it, interestingly enough, this is another piece of housekeeping that we'll have to address. The murals were never officially accessioned into the city's collection, although because the city owns the building, clearly we own the murals. So we will have to remedy that, but that's a separate issue from this. So this is located in Heritage Park on Homer Avenue. Viktor Arnatov was a Russian who left after the Bolshevik Revolution and wound up in Mexico working with Diego Rivera. He and Rivera came to San Francisco to complete a piece for the San Francisco Art Institute, which you all may have seen. And the Palo Alto Medical Foundation was actually his first solo effort, his first solo commission. And he completed these in 1932.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a little bit more background on him, but clearly he has a long history here with the Bay Area. He also went on later to complete works in Coit Tower. So the 4-color frescoes, I don't know if you want to go to the next one. So here you have a sense of the frescoes, and you can see them. They're just behind chain link fence to protect them a bit from people getting to them. So they were commissioned by Dr. Lee, and they're just on that front facade of the building. So there are 4 color frescoes, and below them, you'll see there are these. They're They're black and white, but they almost look like they're carvings. They look like they're in relief. They're pretty stunning. And then on the very front, because there's archways there are 4 roundels. So when we refer to the murals, we're talking about this body of murals on that one section of the building. They're nowhere else in the building. You want to go to the next slide? And so these pieces caused quite a scandal. Public art causing a scandal in the 30s because there were people in states of partial undress. So there were apparently traffic jams up and down Homer's. People were craning their necks to get a look at all that skin. So as you go left to right, the color frescoes themselves, they are so vibrant still. As you go left to right, they depict different inventions in medical history that were major breakthroughs. And so starting from the left here is based on children's medicine. And then below a lot of the frescoes, it showed sort of the older techniques. So actually below the children's medicine fresco, there is a Mayan child having the boards strapped to its head. So, and then the second one was for internal medicine, and below that one there's an image. Do you have it here, Nadia?
Later on.
Okay, of someone casting demons out of the sick person. And so then the next slide. So then this one is the neurosurgeon who invented the Albee saw. And then on the far right is sort of the early X-ray. And interestingly enough, the patient, that's supposed to be a self-portrait of the artist there. So keep in mind, see, there's one of the ones casting the demon out on the right. But they do, when you go to the building, they do look like they're in relief. And they're quite stunning. Keep in mind these are frescoes, and the difference between frescoes and murals, in case you don't know, murals generally are surface painted. And frescoes, it has to happen very quickly, but it's done in wet plaster. Yeah. So the pigment is mixed in with the plaster while it's wet, and has to happen very quickly before it solidifies. But the good news about frescoes, for any of you who've been to Coit Tower or seen frescoes in other parts of the world, we don't see as many of them around here, is that they have a longevity because they're part of the actual wall. It's not just a surface where the paint peels off and becomes affected. So needless to say, we feel very fortunate to have these in the city. The conservator that we're having look, see, these are the 4 roundels on the exterior wall. Anne Rosenthal worked on the restoration of the Coit Tower frescoes. And what's interesting is that when she and ARG came out to have an initial look to give us the estimate for what it's going to cost to do the testing and whatnot, even in her first look, she said, okay, I can see some previous restoration efforts, and it's some of the same, likely the same people and the same methods that were used up in Coit Tower. So she is very, very well qualified to evaluate these pieces and understand the history of what happened, who likely did these treatments, and what the best course of action going forward would be. So we feel like we're in extremely good hands. ARG consultants, who are also doing the evaluation of our whole collection, they also worked with her on the Coit Tower murals. They have more of a structural background as well. So what we're looking at here this evening, it's 2 different contracts but related. The first is to have Anne Rosenthal come on site, do some initial testing on site to determine, what kinds of treatments were done, and then she can go back and make a full estimate for what it's going to cost to do the conservation. The reason we don't bring you that estimate for conservation now and just approve a larger amount is that there are so many potential things that could happen that number would probably be astronomical. So we decided it was more prudent to break it down, approve the funding for the testing, and then we'll have a much clearer picture of what it's going to cost to fully restore them. The intent is that then we would have to go back to the History Museum and have a discussion with them about, once we know what that cost is, what, who is going to pay for that? Is it a combination of the History Museum and the Public Art Commission, or, where does that come? But the first step is we need to find out what kind of shape they're in and what's it going to take to have them restored. An interesting piece to that, and it was a suggestion that they came up with, was that restoration could actually take place not only toward the end of construction, but could take place after they open, and could be a great way to engage people as the conservators on site working on the frescoes, and it could be a tremendous way to bring attention to them, and totally in keeping with what the History Museum is doing. So that's the first piece with the conservator. The second piece with ARG is to have ARG look very carefully at those construction documents and make recommendations for how the pieces need to be protected during construction. The reason this is important, it's not simply, okay, well, we're going to fence it off, is if they're doing plumbing work on the floor above, if they're replacing the window lintels that go between those pieces, there could be structural problems that could completely compromise those pieces. So they need to look at all of it and make recommendations for what kinds of supports may need to be in place, what kind of monitoring needs to take place during the construction to protect them. And again, that's something that we would need to know as the city moves forward with the funding agreement with the History Museum for what it's going to take to protect those during the construction. So those are the two moving pieces.
I just had two questions. One, can you talk a little bit about the plans that they're doing to the renovation of the building? And then would that fall under a % for art that then could go back to fresco restoration? Or
there are a couple things at play there. It's an historic building, so it would be exempt from the private % for art, is the first piece. The second piece, just so that you're aware of it, is that funds generated from the private % for art cannot be used for conservation of existing artwork.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It can only be set aside for the commission of new artwork used through those same funds.
Okay.
Just a funny little legal thing that we but both excellent questions. But the frescoes, we definitely want to make sure they're protected, and that is going to have to be funded somehow.
Right. But are they gutting the entire building, Elise? Like, is it total?
I haven't seen the details of the interior. I'm still waiting on copies of the drawings. I know they went some time ago to ARB, and I'm not clear if the plans changed, because the project has had some, starts and stops, as happens with these projects sometimes. So I'm not clear how much they've evolved from that stage.
Got it.
Is there an opening date planned, or?
We're just trying to get construction approved. Okay.
So it's been like you said, a while. So I was just curious.
Right. So I think they have to get their funding agreement together with the city before we can even begin to speculate about an opening date.
And then one other quick question, and then I'll let you continue. So with the, does PAMF have anything? Oh, sorry, PAMF. So they don't own the piece They don't have anything to do with the pieces, although they commission the pieces. Right? Is that?
Yes, it was a PAMF building.
Right?
It is now the city owns the building. They do not have anything to do with the building any longer.
So that's just an idea, maybe, to go have a conversation with them, maybe. Perhaps.
But I don't know if any of you may have noticed, when you drive up to the PAMF building on El Camino and you go around that turnaround, look up. They have some little roundels that actually have excerpts of those murals replicated in there.
It's funny because I used to use this building from when I was little. And I don't remember any of those pieces. So it's really beautiful to see it.
You really answered my questions already. Because I wondered why this wasn't covered in all the other murals that we've been looking at. So that was one of my questions, but you answered it. And then what was the other question I had? You answered. Oh, the difference between fresco and here. And they're beautiful. I mean, the colors, I couldn't believe that these were put up in 1930, right?
1932 was when they were
are-
completed.
They're still in really good shape. So it's
But
worth-
that's the beauty of fresco.
Well,
but-
that's obviously I just didn't, because the murals that we're looking at, they need a lot of work to keep them right. And these, obviously, if they went in 1930 and they still look like this, that's just amazing.
You know, being outside with the pollution and everything
I
else.
mean, right? It's really cool.
Any other questions or comments?
Is there any more work of his in Palo Alto?
This is the only.
Is this it?
in Palo Alto, not that we're aware of, unless
Yeah.
it's in private hands somewhere.
It's so beautiful.
This is, I guess, a tangent, but there's a mural or a fresco in the train station, University Avenue. I don't know if that belongs to Caltrain or Stanford but I mean, it's,
I believe that would belong to Caltrain.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, I'm curious now how many
Hidden,
accession assets there are, because
Yeah.
had a copy
Right, once
there.
you're up on the platform, that's not Palo Alto.
no, but in the actual station, there's
Right.
a grand piano and a cafe and this mural.
Yeah.
So I was curious who that belonged to. Anyway, that's
So,
it.
to go back, so are we trying? Is there any idea or vision to accession these into our collection, or so you
I
mentioned
believe
that
that'll be
briefly,
a
so I just
housekeeping
wanna-
issue that we'll need to do. We'll have to figure out what the right way to do that is. But yes, essentially, they're already
Ours.
belong to the city, and so we will need to find a way to do that piece of housekeeping and officially accession them.
Okay, so it's a city-owned building,
Yes.
but the museum is funding the renovation? Is that how that's
Yes, they
working?
would be leasing the building, so there's
Okay.
an agreement that they're going to fund the construction. There's my understanding is that there's quite a bit of seismic work that needs to take place. The building has been vacant now for quite some time, so there's quite a bit of work that will need to happen there, and so they will have to fund that construction. So having a clearer picture of what it's going to cost to protect and restore these would be an important piece of that
Very important to
of that puzzle.
preserve those
So that's
pieces.
why this has become somewhat time sensitive,
Right.
because they are trying to finalize those agreements.
Now, would the municipal percent for art kick into that budget and the renovation? Is that how we could get some funds from that?
We're not. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
I was saying to apply to restoration, but you can't to conservatism. It would have to be to a new.
Right, okay.
Right, but that's derived from private percent for art.
Yeah,
I
but this
believe
is a-
Vice Chair Miyagi is asking about municipal percent for art. So that would apply if the city were allocating funds specifically for construction,
say
there could
private.
potentially be a percentage there. And that does go into a different kitty. So technically speaking, we could allocate funds from that to help support this. In fact, because our, and I forgot to mention this earlier, because we have used all of our maintenance funds as of this year, we are proposing to pull this funding out of that municipal percent for art fund to get this testing done. And then we'll come back to the commission with those amounts and a proposal for how we want to proceed.
So if we could get some funding from the municipal percent for art, I think that would be a real help in this. Because like I said, I think this is an important project that needs to be preserved.
Is there an insurance policy that calls out artwork specifically? Like, you own a property, but then you might insure the grand piano that you have, or
Like a schedule.
yeah, like yes.
When
I
you
am
schedule
not
things,
yes. So like, would we in this case make sure that there's adequate insurance? Is this something that not the conservator, but the other team, ARG, like, do they bake that into their proposal of like what kind of insurance it needs to have?
That's it's an interesting question as to whose insurance it would be covered under, and that's something we can look into. In general, no, we do not. schedule like the individual artworks for different amounts. It's more of a blanket policy. We do have an overarching number for the public art collection. So, but it's not itemized.
Because I know in construction, you have property insurance, but
Right.
then if you're going to do construction, you might get separate construction insurance.
Right.
So, God forbid someone backed up a tractor or a
Right.
bulldozer or something. That I wonder if you call it out for this particular sensitive phase.
That's something I'll definitely look into.
Or lighter or something.
Yeah, I was missing the language on it.
But that's
yeah.
part of the protection plan, because you do have construction folks coming and going in and out of that
Yeah,
building.
and who's liable if a subcontract, like a plumber,
Jackhammers out the backside of
Right.
the wall, not realizing the frescoes are there.
Right.
Yes, that's part of. But that's part of what ARG
That's
is
what
calling out
right, the
in the
deep-
construction documents.
Yeah.
Don't do
So
anything on the
worthwhile.
backside of that wall. You know.
Mhm.
So that's part of it. But the insurance piece that's a good point. So we'll make sure of that.
Yeah, any other questions, comments?
Are these the real frescoes? The photos they look like almost too good to be true. Are those real? The photos
Those
of the
are-
fresco.
Those are images of the actual frescoes.
That's what they look like. Wow, they really.
You can see
It's
some.
amazing how.
color.
Yeah. I mean,
They've held their color. When you look at the real ones, because these are
Sorry, I
all
didn't mean to
images.
like make it sound like.
You will see some surface damage
Scratching and stuff, but
on some of them in the current condition. So when you go look at them, you'll see like there are some lines and marks in some places where people have worn them.
And they
some
look
of the
amazing still. That's what's
and some of
they
the
look too.
coloring is uneven, and what was explained to us is that usually that's done when someone tried to do a little patchwork on the surface and it blanches out. So by removing that, it'll take it back to its original color. So there are layers of different restoration efforts that then have changed. So so we learned quite a bit in just our like hour-long session with the
Sounds like
conservator and ARG, and we look forward to learning more and sharing it with the commission.
It's great. It's so exciting.
We definitely got the best people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should
Well, especially if
send
they've
me
worked at Coit Tower.
Coit Tower. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
It was really.
Any other questions or comments? We need a motion, please, for this item.
I move to approve the funds in the amount of $3,600 to hire the art conservator. Should I just read this? To produce an expert condition report based on the on-site in the amount. Wait.
You could break
I
it into two
apologize.
motions if you would prefer.
Okay, so this 3,600, if you could clarify, is for the art conservator fee.
Correct.
And the 2,825 is for
ARG for the construction and protection documents.
ARG for the construction documents and comprehensive recommendations.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion approved passes. Thank you very much. And this is a very important project, I think.
Yes.
Needs to go on. Okay, so now on the non-action items, we're going to go to item 3, which is the retreat. And I think the original date we were talking about was May for the retreat, but Elise and I talked just briefly, and we're talking maybe now August, since that's when the master plan is going in front of the council. And August is when she'll be back from summer vacations and all that. And might be easier to get everybody together then.
So I'm not clear what's going to make the most sense. I believe school is back around August 10th,
16.
16th.
That's last I knew.
Okay. So, and I know sometimes it gets complicated with back to school nights and things like that. So I don't know if perhaps it makes more sense to think about doing, a morning retreat, like a half-day retreat on a day of the week instead of trying to do an evening, or if we want to try and do, I don't know if a Saturday is easier, tougher, but let me know.
How is
More
Friday,
flexible
August
than you guys.
19th?
So you guys need to.
I won't know anything.
I'm really flexible. I will be out of the country until about the 8th or so. So anytime after that,
Okay.
I can make arrangements.
After your jet lag is
It's okay. It's okay.
So maybe we can follow up with a quick request for the dates when you're out of town, and it will help us to inform some options for you.
But you're thinking August, you don't want all the.
I think it's probably going to make more sense to look at August.
Yeah,
The
I
new
do.
date that the master plan is going to council, we're on the tentative for August 15th.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's probably about the earliest we may want to consider doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people are traveling up till right before school starts or getting ready for school to start. So perhaps sending us your availability the last 2 weeks of August and maybe the first week of September, like after Labor Day. What do you think?
Yep.
And then we'll find some windows in there.
And it needs to be 2 or 3 hours. I can't remember. Is it a half day? Or?
Well,
We
if-
did morning last time, right? It was like
Yeah.
9 to 12 or something.
It works
Yeah,
out.
and if we're really
Nice.
going to look at that master plan and come
It'd be
up
a
with
while.
what's the 2-year priority, I mean,
Could take
we're going to want
time.
4 hours maybe, and we can work
I think
have a
so.
working lunch in there or something.
Like a
And we want to
20-minute
come up
break
with
in
a
the middle.
2-year action plan off of that master plan to
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
what we want to do in the next couple of years.
Sounds good.
Okay, so
And it's exciting.
we'll get our
I
dates
know.
to Elise and Nadia, and we'll try to come up with a date here. Okay, last couple of weeks of August or after Labor Day. All right, so now we're going to item 2, which is a public art master plan. And we were going to have a discussion since it was going to go to council here very shortly, but that's been delayed till August, so now we have a little more time to discuss it, go through the draft that's come through, and I think tonight is we want to talk about the attachments to the master plan and the ones that really more directly affect the commission.
So, sorry for the change in timing, but I believe this is actually going to work out for the best. So then we're not rushed to looking at the master plan document. As you all know, the master plan document has a lot of attachments and a lot of policies and a lot of things to consider. A number of those, especially the more municipal documents, are still under review with legal. These are more policy. So the good news about a policy versus an ordinance is that, an ordinance you have to go back to council to have it changed. There's a much larger process. You're going into city code, so essentially it's law. A policy, you can be much more nimble and amend things and reevaluate them as needed every few years. So in starting with what's labeled as Appendix 6, the de-accession policy, the de-accession policy, we had one in existence for a number of years, an accession policy and a de-accession policy. And it was all right, but it needed a lot of tightening. And we did have a couple of instances where the commission was evaluating a potential de-accession of an artwork, and the artist or a member of the public might turn up, and it was not as clear and transparent as to what the process was, and it kept the commissioners from feeling empowered with going through with that process. So the intent here is to make sure that the policy not only is following all the legal guidelines for Visual Artists' Rights Act and the various laws that are in place, but that it empowers the commission with, here is a clear process, we've followed said process, and that you can feel absolutely justified in choosing to de-accession an artwork or not. And
Right, that it's met certain criteria. Right.
Absolutely. And so that has been a difficult stumbling block for us in the past, and Barbara and Gail have come forward with this sample policy, which staff feels is very good. And one of the important things I think to keep in mind with this is, and for the commission to understand, is that de-accessioning is not something that's to be entered into lightly. Mm-hmm. You don't want to have a collection where, we got something that's really trendy and great, and 2 years later we don't want to have anything to do with it. The de-accessioning it's a pretty serious thing. Artists really enjoy being part of a city collection, and when you remove something from the collection, it does affect them. And so it is something to be taken into consideration, and for the same reason you evaluate gifts the same way. We'll look at the gifts in a moment. But I just want to call your attention to a couple of the introduction. I won't read it out loud. I think it was very good. But under the last line in policy number 1, saying that, deaccessioning should be deliberate and independent of political pressures, fluctuation in artistic taste, popularity, or public opinion. So the commission feels empowered to commission something, and sometimes something when it first goes in can be controversial. And over time, sometimes it becomes a very beloved piece in the collection. If that is not the case, and it's been there for a long time, and there are other challenges that emerge with it, then you have a clear process to follow to go through a deaccession. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Have we had that issue where we've really had a lot of backlash, a lot of pieces of artwork, or really it seems like it's been quite small in terms of like having to want deaccession things, but I mean my question is, you mentioned that a lot of times there's pressures, and so my question is that there are I think we have a lot of pieces that I feel like are not shown, and so I feel like personally I'm curious as to if there's a way that, usually when I think of deaccession I think about, well, maybe we just don't have the space to really share the works in a really accessible, meaningful way. And so I'm just curious, so that I don't see that in here, and so I'm just curious if there's a way, if that's something that you've seen done, or if that's something that you think might be.
It is actually in here somewhere. If there's not adequate.
Does that make sense? Kind of what I'm getting.
Yes,
to?
if something can't be exhibited, and the language is in here somewhere about not being able to find suitable display for it, or if it's not available.
I just didn't see it easily. I know
Six
saw
under guidelines.
Okay.
Right. So guidelines under 6, the artwork is not or is only rarely on display because the city lacks a location for its display.
Is that something then you as staff would make that decision, or is that something that the commission would come? Because we don't really. we know what's in our collection, but we don't necessarily know what's on view, right? All the time. So is that something you would as staff make that decision that we just don't have enough?
Well, and a lot of that is sort of outlined here. When it does recommend that we start with looking, doing an evaluation of the collection. And part of the Public Art Master Plan, the consultants did do an overall evaluation. And we've commissioned ARG to do condition reports and evaluations of everything in the collection. So having those two pieces and having an updated, adopted deaccession policy, then within this next year, the commission is in a position to sit down, look at the collection, and yes, for the portable collection, some of those recommendations may come from staff for various reasons. For instance, in the portable collection, there are a couple of artists who are, by these definitions, overrepresented in our collection. So that might be a reason for us to recommend some of those for deaccession.
Okay.
Elise, I was just wondering if you feel like the conditions or the guidelines are also contain the provision for the site where the art is contained. The context has changed.
It does. Number 8 under guidelines, changes to the site have significantly limited or prevented the public's access. And I think somewhere else it does talk about the context changing around.
Yes, 7, character or design of the site.
Character design.
So as I said, that staff has gone through this pretty carefully. And so it gives you very serious criteria for when something might be considered for deaccession. And it also helps you as commissioners when you get a member of the public who says, well, I don't like that artwork and I want you to get rid of it. Well, then you are in a position to say, well, here's the document and these are the
Here's
criteria that we
guidelines.
look at.
It's not that easy.
Are there,
Yeah.
which of these does it meet? And so I think having a very clear policy in place really helps staff, helps the commissioners, and helps the public understand. And then it goes through the procedures of how a request is made, the artist needs to be contacted, what public meetings take place, does the commission want to put together an ad hoc committee to evaluate it further before coming back to the full commission. I feel like it's pretty clear on the process, but I would love to hear if there are questions or elements of the policy that did not seem clear to you.
When it, in the policy number 3, at regular intervals, do we have to know what those regular intervals are? Is that every 5 years? Is it every 10 years? Or just at this?
I think it needs to be at the commission's discretion.
Because we just did a major look at the whole collection, right?
Well, it's in process. So the murals haven't been evaluated yet by ARG, but the idea is once we have that report in and we have this document in place, then staff can come forward with some recommendations and say, hey, given all of this that we know, these are the pieces that staff feels like the commission might want to consider deaccessioning. Do we want to put together an ad hoc committee and explore this further?
Got it.
And I'm just curious, are we aware of best practices of other cities? Is this a more stringent requirement for deaccession, or is it pretty standard? Or
this is based on other cities and tightens where the downfalls are. So Gail Goldman's real forte is in these kinds of the legal documents and all of this kind of stuff. She loves these policies. And so we feel like this is really tight. It is superior to what other cities have, but we've seen the downfall of having a policy that is less than clear.
Right. No, I'm just, it really has to jump through quite a few hoops, and I'm wondering, if there are items for question, if we would ever get to a point where we would deaccession. It just seems really strict, but if that's normal, I'm just kind of curious.
It's normal, and what is really great about this is, yes, it seems like a lot of hoops, I understand that, but then the artist has been notified, there have been public meetings, there's been opportunity for people who may want to come champion the piece, or who may want to come forward and say, hey, if this is a maintenance nightmare, I love it, I'll fund it.
Got it.
But you don't want to be put in a position where someone comes forward and says, hey, Public Art Commission, you had one meeting about this and suddenly the piece is gone. Well, how come we weren't notified? So it's about following a process where everyone's been brought along and it's been.
And I don't mean actually that the process, it's more before we even get to the process, it's it has to meet quite a few. So then I'm I think the follow through is totally, but it was more getting to that is wow.
But I think that goes to their their introduction saying that this shouldn't be entered into lightly.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that we're not in a position where someone says, well, I can't stand that Narduli piece, you just put it in, but here's my letter and I think you ought to deaccession it. Because certainly there would be someone that would come forward for almost everything in the city, and we wouldn't have a collection at all. So I think that's sort of why that criteria is out there.
And can you just explain to what is the criteria? What is the reasoning behind the art studios? That how you weigh the requirement that everybody who has a studio can accession or put one work of art into the collection. What is that?
It's that they offer one as a donation, and
Right.
the commission considers whether to accept that gift. So the reasoning behind that is because the city is subsidizing that space for artists.
It's interesting that you just mentioned that, because I actually thought that we had to accept, it was, and the way you just, so we don't actually have to accept the pieces.
No.
If we don't, okay. I thought I was under the assumption that it was a requirement that we have to.
No.
Okay.
And in fact, we can continue that.
Yeah.
in the gift policy, but I just
Okay.
want to make sure we're finished with
Yeah,
the
yeah, sure.
de-accession policy
Sorry.
and addressing
And
questions.
is there a special stipulation for land art? Just like Public Works can't take care of it anymore, and so then it's like
It says integrated by art with maybe
Environmental
scale and
art.
integrated for architecture.
Commissioner Ross, whatever are you referring to? Well, I think part of that also falls into our gifts and accessioning policy, but yes, certainly the inability to maintain an artwork is one of the criteria for a de-accession. So I think that would certainly fall into the category of a land art piece that the city, for whatever reason, cannot maintain in the manner in which it's supposed to be.
and that's in here.
Yes, the inability to maintain it or a materiality problem.
Right.
So if by the nature of the fact that it's been so many years later and the plant material has evolved and the city can't care for it, that is a fundamental flaw in the artwork, or it may have reached the end of its useful life, as we like to say.
Yeah.
It's a very important policy to have done, and I can, in San Jose, I can think of one instance where we had a piece that was vandalized repeatedly, and we had to take it out of the collection because of that. So that could be one reason that something happens. That you can't just, because I don't like it, you take it out of it. And the same thing is, as you were saying, is the accepting a piece too, is I like it, let's take it in the collection. You got to have procedures and policies to do that. So this is a very important thing that we can now point to and saying we have this policy in place to take a piece out of the collection. So very important part of the master plan and the commission is one of the tools that we have. Hey, any other questions about this? Comments? Okay.
Okay.
Now the other side of it.
Okay.
Okay. Gifts.
So the sample gifts policy. So I think it's important to call out that the city does have a citywide gifts policy, of course. But we need to have a policy specific to artwork, especially since it would come into the public arts collection and then becomes the responsibility of us to maintain. So we did have an accession policy. Again, it needed to be really tightened up, and I think in partnership with the de-accession policy, this offers some real guidance and assistance both to the public and the commissioners to feel empowered to accept or reject a gift. And part of the reason this is important is we don't necessarily want to be the repository for all, deceased relatives' paintings hiding behind the sofas.
Right.
So, and people are very well intentioned and feel like they're doing the city a favor, but we're saddled with protecting, this collection and maintaining it, and we can't expand beyond our means, and we want to make sure that we grow the collection in a way that is smart, and that the commission and the city is proud of. So it outlines the criteria for why to accept it or not, such as our ability to care for and house it, or whether it is suitable for our audience, which sometimes is an issue. There are items currently in our collection that, frankly, we never get to show because they're not really appropriate for showing in public space. So this gifts policy really is best practice in the field of public art. We really do, sometimes it is appropriate in a gift, and it is called out here, especially if somebody's going to give an outdoor piece that is likely to have some real maintenance considerations, that we would ask for an endowment to go with that gift in order to maintain it, which is not out of line with what other cities do. Many of them do.
So Elise, I guess so. Now going back, you mentioned that there are some pieces that you don't think are appropriate, and so I guess my misunderstanding is need more clarification. Is then if it was to begin with, was there a reasoning as to why it was accession if we can't show? I mean, those are what I'm just trying to understand in terms of.
The collection's grown since the
Yes.
1970s.
Right.
It's been a lot of commissioners.
Sure.
There was not, until very recently, there wasn't full-time staff. So a lot of it was sort of commissioner run and initiated, and the collection was very much subject to some commissioners' tastes
Okay.
and whims. And so what we're trying to do is really, correct that and measure that and prevent that from happening in the future, because it's not really appropriate at this time. And it was, I'm not saying Palo Alto was out of line. It was
Right,
common.
right. Yeah.
It was common to the way public art programs came to being, is that many of them were very much commissioner led. And some of the pieces so for instance, for a number of years, the commission made a practice of purchasing an artwork from the youth art show that now takes place at the Art Center every year, and they would purchase one and take it into the collection. And in the scope of an exhibition, some of these pieces are very powerful, but not necessarily suitable to hang in a public space. So this has very clear definitions about what qualifies as an artist that we would want in the collection, that it needs to be suitable for public view, all of that.
The other thing is, once, just from my own experience, when it does come to a vote, without any sort of guidelines, it's very hard to vote not to take it. And it had been like an anecdotal practice of outgoing commissioners to donate something to the commission of their own work. And in some cases, it didn't, in my opinion, achieve a meritorious standard. But this was your fellow commissioner.
It's
who was
well,
bringing-
it's well intentioned. It's generous,
it's
but
always
it's
well-intentioned.
without guidelines.
Right. So
And I
it's-
think a lot of it
it's
too
like
is I'm
just
thinking with
bring it in, right?
from a museum standpoint too, and I did a lot of studies about private art collectors, and so from that standpoint, it's very specific. They have these.
Yeah. Well,
and
and
so
look
I
at us.
also- exactly. No, we're trying to get
Right.
in that framework. Exactly. Yeah. So that's why. Thank you for the clarification. Sorry if it's redundant.
No, of course, and
just
I think these are all
get the
valid
background,
points, because
too.
Commissioner Ross has seen some of the challenges we've had with both a de-accession and an accession policy that lacked some of this clarification.
And it becomes very subjective, and that's very uncomfortable and not professional. So you err on the side of conservative there. You wouldn't no.
And so I think what's really great about this is that a donation request has to be filled out, sort of similar to a de-accession, to really evaluate, is this an artist that meets, and there are definitions here, for what qualifies as an artist, what is it we're looking at for, maintenance standpoint. Is this artist already well represented in our collection? Does it not make sense to bring in another one? So, if you look on page 4, it says, the Public Art Commission shall consider the following criteria in making their decision. And these are all very important criteria that then can empower you to say yes or to say no, thank you. And I noticed there are a couple of minor edits in here, which I will clean up. Yeah, sorry. That's why it's stamped draft.
I think this will be very useful. Really, when I started reading through it, I thought, oh, this is a lot. But it works as a tool, so it's great.
It's a lot of it's a lot of language, but it's I think
we
it's
have the
very
language.
clear on. It's like having a checklist.
Yeah.
Of here's what we need to consider it. Here are the reasons to take it in.
I think it's great. Good tool.
Any other comments, questions? One other attachment, if we can touch on briefly, and it affects everybody at this table, is term limits for the commissioners. So if we can touch on that just briefly about.
Absolutely. In fact, that's been dropped from the
it
Public
has?
Art Master Plan. So one of the recommendations that the consultants made was inserting language about the terms of the Public Art Commission so that no commissioner would serve more than 2 full terms, meaning that if you came in at a partial term, you wouldn't be bounced out after you did a full term and a partial term. You could do 2 plus that partial term. And the reason they put that in there is because it's a common challenge in cities to have people who will sit on commissions for an extremely long time. And then it becomes a challenge for a council to not reappoint them. And it's good to have changeover on these kinds of advisory bodies. So they did make that recommendation on one of their policies because there are much broader ramifications to all of the boards and commissions, and this would be the first board and commission to put in a term limit. We've decided to pull that out at this time, and legal and the clerk's office are evaluating that, but it's no longer a part of what we're bringing forward for the public art master plan. And quite frankly, it hasn't been an issue for the Public Art Commission. Maybe it's a reflection on us, but usually by the end of 2 full terms, people are ready to move on. So that was something that they recommended, but we're not actually moving forward with it. Are there any other questions?
Self-imposed term limits. Okay, thank you. All right, so are there any announcements?
Oh wait, we have the temporary art policy.
Oh.
We have one more.
Appendix 10.
Oh, good.
So again,
okay, sorry.
Yes,
the public art program's previous temporary public art guidelines were out of date. They were very minimal. It was something that was put together in about 2009 to sort of, give us a method for doing temporary public art. There were still a lot of things left in gray area, and so this really helps tighten it up. And especially with the expansion of the temporary public art programming on King Plaza, and also wanting to do it elsewhere, and that it's been a huge recommendation in the master plan. We felt like this is an important document to have come forward. It really clarifies the terms of temporary public art exhibits, how works are proposed, selected, and placed. The new policy is based on some of the best examples of temporary public art policies and then tailored to suit Palo Alto. Actually, one of the really good ones that they went off of was it Sydney? It was somewhere in Australia, and I know we had a former commissioner and chair usage who would come forward because she would travel back to Australia to see family, and she would constantly tell, look at what they're doing. And they do indeed in Australia, they do some pretty great temporary projects. Mm-hmm. But it was based, on that and a number of other ones as well. But it's also another important document for us to set aside and to be able to stand up and say, I'm so glad you love that temporary artwork, but this is the policy, and by definition, it is meant to be temporary. And so we want to make sure that we're very clear with that it helps prevent sort of lobbying, give it 3 more months, we'll give it 5 more months. Well, it gets too complicated, and so it's much cleaner to just be very cut and dry with the definitions. So I believe how it's defined here is anything over 24 hours, and the term is 1 year.
And Aurora is a good example of not having a policy in place.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so here it just talks about how in the 2-year, when the city creates its work plan and identifies temporary public art projects and sites, that then staff can move forward and launch that, putting together a selection panel. Really just formalizing how all of that is done in the future is going to be so much cleaner for people who come to commissioners and come to staff, because I get it all the time. I have this great idea. And it's hard to defend against and be graceful, and you want to help people, but we can't place everything that people want to place all over the city. There is real expense and considerations that have to be thought through, and so I feel like this policy is very clean. Are there any questions?
Okay. Can I just ask about this in permitting temporary artworks? The city does not intend to open a public forum for free speech activity?
Legal's going to soften that language,
Okay.
but it's an interesting legal term, right? So if something is not government speech, if it's considered free speech, what you're doing essentially is opening a forum. So the idea is that when you place a temporary public artwork out on the plaza, we're not inviting everybody else to come bring their temporary public artwork and join in the
That's
dialogue
what
and
that
put it
means.
on the plaza.
Oh, okay, got it.
So
Thank you.
it is something that is commissioned through the city. It is not an invitation to then add your
I just
artwork
didn't
to it.
understand it
It's
that
a
way.
weird legalese thing, and the
Uh-huh.
legal department has said, look, we're gonna massage that.
Yeah, just to make it.
Because
I didn't understand
even
that.
even the first time I read it, I sort of bristled like, oh, that's way.
That
I
seems
don't.
strange, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
So that will be altered. But good point. I'm glad you brought it up because I had the same
Or,
reaction.
you know?
And that goes to freedom of speech and all that
Mhm.
stuff, so that cities really have to be careful of things that they put out because of the freedom of speech, and you don't want to abridge anybody's amendment.
Right, or feel like you're censoring someone.
Right.
So.
But you have to then protect yourself too, so you don't get 15 people out here doing
Right.
something. And this is important too, because as the new movement in, excuse me, in public art now is more towards temporary public art than it is permanent public art. So as we have out here in our plaza and in different places around the city. So another important part of the master plan and one of the tools that we have. Okay, is that it now for?
That's it for policies. I don't
Okay.
know if you wanted to add anything sort of larger, but
No, but as you were saying, a lot of this is going through legal, and so as they come out of legal, then we'll be able to read them and have more comments on them.
and they'll come back. The intent for next month is that we have the master plan with some sections highlighted showing some of the places where there were changes, especially given the great input we got both from the commission and some from staff. And all of these attachments. So we felt like it was going to be better to just walk you through these on their own because it's a lot to digest all at once.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Thank you very much. This is okay, any announcements?
All of our May dates, and then Artist Studios? Open Studios?
Oh, open studio.
So, Silicon Valley Open Studios 2016 is coming up. It's going to be the second weekend of May, May 14th and 15th. 19 cabaret artists are participating in Open Studios this year. The studios will be open between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. both days. And also in conjunction to the Open Studios, all cabaret artists will participate in a group exhibition, which will be on display in the Cabaret Art Lab, Studio U7. So we welcome you to enjoy the event.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, and then the next meeting is May 19th. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We're adjourned for tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you.